Nobody plans to fail, they just fail to plan. You can put all the figures in front of someone, but if they have psychological blocks that you don't know about, nothing's going to happen. Money blocks a lot of behaviours, and behaviours block money. Many times I've had to take off the financial advising hat, put on the psychology hat, put the pen down, pass the tissue box across the table and debrief, because a lot of issues are coming up that you had no idea were actually sitting there. Trauma is stored in every cell in the body. We also know that trauma is intergenerational. And what I mean by that is that if you've had a trauma and you're much younger, then your survival instincts are what drive you. So every decision you ever make is about safety, security, survival. I will guarantee you that in the last 5 years of her working life to age 75, she will end up in poverty. Unresolved trauma that they're not even probably aware of themselves is actually driving the money decisions they make to set themselves up or fail.
Welcome to the Property Addicts Australia podcast. Today we are joined by Philippa Hunt, behavioural psychologist turned financial planner and advisor. Philippa, today is a very important topic for our audience, and welcome to Property Addicts Australia. Over to you. Tell us a bit about yourself and your journey.
First of all, Mona and Sana, thank you so much for your invitation to come onto your podcast. Really appreciate you reaching out because the field that I found myself in was the intersection of psychology and money. And it wasn't because I've been in the advice industry now for 25 years. So I came from HR and realized over time that what drives decisions is not what you think. You can put all the figures in front of someone, but if they have psychological blocks that you don't know about, nothing's going to happen. So it wasn't until I'd been in finance and financial advising for some time that I realized that money blocks a lot of behaviours, and behaviours block money. So, and you don't know what's going on under the surface when you're trying to help someone. Many times I've had to take off the financial advising hat, put on the psychology hat, put the pen down, pass the tissue box across the table and debrief, because a lot of issues are coming up that you had no idea were actually sitting there. So it's been an interesting pivot point, I suppose, in what I do, because it's now taken on a completely different mindset from me, rather than just saying, right, here are your facts, here are your figures, we'll do this, 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 and this. And the client's sitting there and I've got no idea what I'm really dealing with. So that has become a driver for me now. And I'm very grateful to have got the background in psychology that I do. So, yes, it's been a very interesting journey. And when I started out in psychology and HR, I never thought I'd end up here.
That's incredible, Philippa. I know that you then went down the path of Wise Girls Academy. Tell us a bit about that, how that started and what that's
Mm.
all about.
Well, that was my moment years ago when I realised we're talking 18 years ago, almost 20 years ago, that women were never going to have enough to retire on. Now, also at the time, it became very clear to us in the industry, longevity was going to outrun the money. Now, people were dying sort of in their 70s and early 80s when I first started. Now they're not dying. We're getting cures for cancers and cures for everything else and how to live with dementia. And now I'm dealing with Nana and Pop in their 90s, their children in their 70s, and their grandchildren in their 40s and 50s. And they're all trying to work out aged care for different needs and different ages and stages. We've never had that before. So when I realised that women are on the back foot because they earn less, they work in less highly paid jobs, and by comparison with men, they have a lot less super. So it made me realise that unless women were educated, that's when I started Wise Girls Money Academy. So it's now a teaching course of 6 modules. It took a lot of effort and a lot of money to get it to the point where it is now. But now I'm finding, and I had a meeting with women, just catch up for coffee on Sunday, and they said, "What do you do?" So I told them, and one of them shot back and said, "Well, where were you when I needed you 3 years ago?" Which stopped me in my tracks, and that was made me realise that women and people in there who are going through divorce and separation, and we're talking about both sides here, often have to start again in their 50s. So again, it's now come full circle where we have to prepare for retirement of at least 25 to 30 years. And for a lot of women, that was more time than they ever spent in the workforce. So you can understand that I got a bit concerned that these women would end up in poverty. And a lot of men who have lost a lot in property settlements um, are worse off than they ever were as well. So even though we're now contributing out to 75, we have people still working in their 70s so they can prepare for their retirement. So it's shifted a lot since I first started Wise Girls Money. And now it's kind of my mission to get out there and start helping people prepare earlier.
Thanks for sharing that, Philippa. You talked earlier a bit about psychology and money and how it's all linked together. If you could talk us through what are early childhood experiences or life experiences that lead to these issues?
Well, one of the most interesting highlights that came to me just this year were two friends of mine who had every opportunity to start much younger. And wasn't until I actually had a look at what had gone before in their early lives in particular. Both of them had come out of very difficult relationships with narcissistic men who'd basically shattered their self-worth and self-esteem. And one of them had severe childhood trauma where everything was uprooted, where they changed countries as migrants and coming here didn't speak English as children. And it wasn't until I realised the hidden impact of that trauma on the adult decisions did the light go on for me. And every behavioural psychologist out there would go, well, yes. But it didn't occur to me that it actually was the way they dealt with their money, was how they set themselves up. So we know that trauma is stored in every cell in the body. We also know that trauma is intergenerational. And what I mean by that is that if you've had a trauma and you're much younger, then your survival instincts are what drive you. So every decision you ever make is about safety, security, survival. And that is a huge driver for a lot of people to make as much money as they possibly can just so they can feel safe. But on the other hand, I've also found that there's a whole lot of sabotage going on at the deepest levels because they don't feel that they're worthy of having money and holding on to it. So we have a lot of retail therapy, or we have a string of broken relationships. And it wasn't until I looked at the patterning of the relationships over an adult life. Now, I've known one particular friend for 30 years. We kind of grew up together. However, when I looked at the decisions that she made when she got an inheritance, I will guarantee you that in the last 5 years of her working life to age 75, she will end up in poverty.
That's
It's
scary.
unbelievable, but that was what made me realise that trauma, unresolved trauma, that they're not even probably aware of themselves, is actually driving the money decisions they make to set themselves up or fail. Nobody plans to fail, they just fail to plan.
And what about risk tolerance and investing, really? If such individuals, if they're driven, right, driven to have security, stability, and control and survival, would they not have a higher risk tolerance than many other people, or they wouldn't?
Well, that's an interesting question because when it comes to
Mm.
safety, survival, and security, there is no risk tolerance. It's all about survival. And so they will go into investments that are absolutely rock solid. And that's why there's this drive towards property. And as I was in my earlier years in financial advising, I discovered that people from cultures, and I'm going to put a generalization here up front, from around the Mediterranean buy blocks of flats. That's touch it, see it, feel it, paint it, insure it, check it out, fix the pipes, fix the plumbing. That's their financial security. It's also intergenerational so that they can hand it down to their children. And so often people coming to this country have a driver to better themselves, and they'll work day and night to provide, working 3 jobs, supporting their family, getting them started. And the emphasis for their children is on higher education. It's a pattern over and over again. It's been proven in longitudinal studies all over the place. So when you relate that back to financial advising, once I start asking about their background, it's a different conversation, because I used to teach migrant kids English. I know about the cultures and the customs because I made it my business to learn not only where they came from, but how to understand them and some of their language so that there was a better relationship. And that served me really well when I was out in HR because of employees in organisations. And even now in financial advising, now I'm educating women, I'm very mindful of their background because of my previous experience, fortunately, in being able to ask the right questions. And I remember somebody saying, no one's ever asked me that before. Yep. So then I asked them about safety, security and survival. Yes, yes and yes. So in terms of risk tolerance, until they've got themselves set up rock solid, the risk tolerance is about keeping everything stable, particularly if they're older people coming and they're setting up. The younger generation are a little more open to risk tolerance because they've grown up with born with devices pretty much in their hands. And I call it the Gen Z salute. The hand goes into the pocket and it whips out with the mobile phone. It's in there. And so they spend their lives online. They are much more open to risk, but the older generation most certainly are not. They don't understand it. They've never had experience in it, and they stick to what they know.
Philippa, but it's a really scary stat that you shared that people potentially would work well into their 70s
They
to
are.
give for their retirement. I think what's even scarier is in today's industry, when you listen to podcasts or watch YouTube videos, people don't talk about this. Yes, everyone celebrates a lot of success, but very little gets spoken about the challenges that people have truly gone through, the trauma people have had to face in their lives. Nobody talks about it because it's a bit of a taboo. Like, would you
Mm.
have any thoughts on that? Because, yes, everyone celebrates young guns and newcomers and people, who may have had everything on a platter, as opposed to talking about someone actually started with trauma and where they ended up in life. Maybe some did end up with some good outcomes because of the changes they made.
It takes a lot of courage for people to own up to any trauma in their life. And it showed in that commission started up in 2012 that went to 2017 for child sexual abuse in institutions. What they found was that it takes average of 20 to 25 years before an adult will finally admit. And so when they had 5,000 people come through in that Royal Commission, they know that there are thousands more who couldn't bring themselves to discuss it. Because when you're dealing with that, and I'm not just talking about those sorts of childhood traumas, when people have gone through loss in their families, horrendous losses in their families, or they're coming from war zones where survival is just every minute of every day, you don't shake that off just because you've changed geography, which is what they found with Holocaust survivors. Their children in Australia and England and America have everything, as you say, given to them on a plate because their parents worked so hard to give them a better life, better than what they had. during the war, but because trauma tends to be intergenerational, then their behaviour in the family of survival is what we do in our family. That's their normal. And so, of course, that's going to carry through because that's all they know. For them, that is normal. So I'm getting into a very different area of advising. But one thing I discovered with education, that when people start to burrow down into the way they see their money and the way they feel about their money, that's when all of this starts to emerge. So it takes a lot of work developmentally. Training is one thing, you're just learning facts. But to put that into practice and keep practicing, like learning to drive a car, that's developmental training. So to change behaviour, you just have to keep doing it and keep practicing. So unless they understand that there are blocks that are preventing them from moving forward because they're too scared, then they're going to stay right where they are, and it comes right back to being risk averse.
So, what would you suggest to someone in that situation? Like, say, yes, for some people, maybe it's too late to change things, but say someone in their 30s or early 40s, what would you say to them? This is what you need to do to change these patterns that you have carried all your life.
Well, this is where you work with teams of professionals because a lot of issues come up, and I've experienced this many times. Whereas I said, I've had to push the box of tissues over to them and everything stops until they debrief. In other words, they get it off their chest and find out what's wrong that they're feeling with them. And I should clarify the word, there's nothing wrong with it. It's what they're feeling at the moment. And so then they get a bit embarrassed because they're supposed to be talking about their finances and something else has come up entirely. But often it's around working with your mental health professionals that people actually come to understand that the behaviours that are driving them come from somewhere else. And so if you've got a compulsive spender with retail therapy, what is it they're trying to heal in themselves, make themselves feel better? Whereas for some people, spending money gives them nightmares because they will never have enough. So 1 million isn't enough for them. How many people have I seen with, and I've often wondered about the psychology when they're saying, oh, yes, I've got 36 investment properties. The first thing I think of, how do you sleep at night with all that debt? And so to them, it's amassing financial safety and security. That's their driver behind it. So, and when I see that over-reliance on property, I start asking different questions as to where this came from, because nobody's born desiring to go and buy 36 investment properties. So along the way, something must have done that. I think you're right. The younger you are, and if this is within your family, yes, you can get the help to sort this out so that you make better financial decisions as the outcome. So the finance is the outcome of where you're trying to go, just as you know this in the work that you do. So when I hear women say, oh, shares are risky, first question I ask, why do you say that? Oh, I don't know anything about them. Therefore, they're risky for me. And when you educate them, they then go and wait for it. They'll set up a little investment platform and they'll invest $20. Do you know why they do only the $20?
Fine.
Because they've never done it before. And they're not willing to risk more than $20 to find out whether or not this works. So they're not going to sit there in a pub with their mates and do online gambling, which is a lot more than $20 for the thrill of winning and losing. Women will invest their $20 to see if they can make another $20. And they inch by inch by inch. That's our psychology. That's our DNA. That's the way our brains work.
So,
And so women will inch their way through learning to invest in something new like shares because for them, the risk isn't worth it. And yet, the share market and the property market have really done very well. But because they don't understand shares, but they understand buying a house, that's the driver. So they don't see shares as contributing to their safety and security, but property it does, because they can drive past it or they can walk into it.
Absolutely. And you referred to having an X number of properties. You used the number 36 properties. So it's a big thing, right, in the property industry. It's like, how many properties do you own? Um, but where does one draw a line and not use that as a like a vanity metric, really, and say, okay, well, this is enough for me? Because it sounds like, people who are driven by that, it may be that it's never enough for them.
Precisely. You've just nailed it. It is never enough. And so if it's never enough from vanity, because they have to keep proving themselves, I'd be asking, who told you that you weren't worth 100%? Who told you that you had to keep performing to be approved of?
Mhm.
Who told you that you had to get 100% on your tests and 99 wasn't good enough?
So
Yeah?
so relate to that, Philippa. So relate to
And,
that.
and let me tell you, I am owning up to that as well.
Yeah. Oh,
Because when you come from that background of approval tied to performance, you get overachievers. And so then it becomes a compulsion. It goes beyond financial safety and security, because in my parents' day, owning one home was the guarantee of financial security. But now that property has become an approval rating in the press and the media, you rightly point out it's now going down to the pub and, oh, I own 36 investment properties. But what it's saying is that I am worth 36 investment properties, if that makes sense.
so their self-worth is tied into that number.
Correct. Exactly. And that also is part of what I teach. The first half of my course is all about values, self-worth, self-esteem, because values drive your purchasing decisions. If you value financial safety and security, you will go after the things that make you feel safe, like property. Okay. And so when you're looking at people's psychology, which is the motivator, the underneath motivator and driver are your values, whatever they are. So to satisfy that need, which is your base needs, after that, the want is the quality of that need. So you need a home. What sort of home do you want and where? So you've got a lot of values. If you came from a background that valued image and valued performance, all your purchasing decisions will be based on those values. If you are a saver, where you make do, eat it up and wear it out, and you're risk averse, then your financial decisions are around how much cash you have stashed in the bank and how many properties you own outright. No debt, because debt to them is what keeps them awake at night. So it's a different perception of the same issue, depending where you come from. So a lot of people they are afraid to invest other than property because they just don't know enough about it. And so they're not risk averse, because anyone who borrows to buy a property is taking on risk, but they don't see it like that. So you can have $1 million mortgage, because during COVID, what were the interest rates? Can you remember?
Yeah, 2% or less even.
It was. So what did the banks do?
Well,
Shovel money,
a lot.
a lot. So nobody thought the interest rates would go up and up and up, did they? And people about 3 or 4 years ago were quite comfortable. Now they're worrying if they can afford their mortgage. And even with the interest rates coming down, they're still under mortgage stress, a lot of them, because the banks kept shoveling money. I'm in finance. I saw what was happening just as you did. And so people were taking on $1 million mortgages because at the time they could afford it. And
Well,
now they're stuck. And a lot of people are now realizing that they got in at the right time. If the interest rates keep coming down, they can manage. So then the cost of living went up. So the last 4 years, let me just think, 3 years since COVID, the place has gone nuts. I've never seen anything like it, nor my years of finance. And in the middle of all of this, you've got people who are just struggling to survive. You've got people who are desperate to buy a home, only to find that demand is outstripping supply.
Well, Philippa, you know what's scary? Being in the lending space for us, watching influencers on Instagram and YouTube promoting unlimited lending, trust lending. I don't know if you've heard about it. Uh,
There was an article.
yeah, so Macquarie recently pulled out of trust lending altogether because there were influencers who were promoting that you can buy properties in a trust and effectively ignore each one at a time and borrow a lot of money without declaring that you can actually afford it. And we've had clients where Mona's had clients where they've been really left disappointed when they're told the reality. Actually, there's nothing such as unlimited borrowing. You still need to be able to service for those mortgages.
Yeah, I've had people where I've talked through the numbers and I've told them based on your family income, um, you know, sub 200K odd family income, you could purchase 2 investment properties at this point in time. And they've been very disappointed, but it's not an overnight thing. Our most successful clients have actually built their portfolios over a long period of time.
But I think the scary bit is though, right, that in the industry, like I can count how many times clients have picked up the phone to us and said, what about unlimited borrowing capacity? So and so was talking about unlimited borrowing, and like, where do you draw the line? What I guess it brings me back to the question,
Mm.
what's enough? Like, what's enough? How do you draw
I'm
the
just
line?
asking how these influencers make their money
Yeah.
promoting. Someone is paying them to promote. Now, the Commonwealth Bank followed on from Macquarie and they've suspended it. And you actually, typical Commonwealth Bank, Matt Common, up there making profit. Or you can have a credit card for 6 months. At least you've got a Commonwealth Bank product and they'll talk to you. Gotta love it.
Yeah, that's very, very recent. So I guess moving on to men versus women, what barriers do women face as part of this journey? Because obviously men promote a lot of this stuff. Men are really up there and going for it. So yeah, well, how do women fit in and what barriers do they face?
Women are more risk averse than men, in my experience. Men will, I assume some of these finfluencers, a lot of them were shut down by ASIC in 2021, I think it was. Was it 22? Where they called them in and said, you are giving financial advice. If you don't stop it, I'll throw you in jail. One of them actually was. So the problem you've got with social media is that these finfluencers can talk about property because it's not a financial product. So these finfluencers years ago were flogging Bitcoin, advising to go and buy it. So ASIC realised that everyone was going to find themselves in a whole lot of trouble here. So they stopped them from doing that. However, property can be spruiked because it's not a financial product. And endlessly over the last 30 years, we have had product floggers, as we call them in our industry, because property is not a financial product. If real estate agents were licensed the way we are, the real estate agencies would close overnight, simply because what we have to go through to be financial advisors and the regulations we have to face going through advice, you know all this. So when these product floggers talk about this lending, there was an article, I saved it, about the very thing, was because they're talking about not just trusts, they're talking about self-managed super funds, because property can be set up in a trust structure. So people are saying, oh, that means that I can borrow all this money because I personally can't afford it, but my super fund can, or I'm going to set it up in a trust. So ASIC's gone, oh God, here we go again. And so the banks this time, realising they had come fairly unstuck in the previous Royal Commission, didn't want to be faced with allegations of irresponsible lending. And given Macquarie has just repaid Shield and Guardian investors the money that they lost, that was a complete failure around every sector. No one's accepting responsibilities for that either. So I agree with the fact that Macquarie slammed the door on it, and so they should, because once you start going down the path of irresponsible lending, it's going to come back and bite you, the fact that you lent them the money in the first place. The thing is to get to the finfluencers on social media, and I'm pretty sure ASIC would be all over this. I'd be surprised if they weren't, not as if they're going to take action overnight. However, the problem is that young people get a lot of financial education and misinformation from social media, TikTok. So you're absolutely right. In terms of being disappointed, I think it's just a dose of reality that you're giving them, and in terms of educating them, that it's just not possible. And if they did go down that path, that's if anyone was going to lend to them. In terms of accounting and their tax and everything else, they could end themselves up owing an awful lot of money in tax anyway. So I don't think it's a great option unless people are highly educated about what the risk that they're getting into.
Yeah, it's about knowing the risks, right? And that's a conversation I had with this couple. You could go down this path, but these are the things that you need to be wary of. But I guess I'm not really sure, how much the risks get spoken about when these transactions actually take place, or is it about just closing the deal?
I think you nailed it. It's closing the deal. So who gets paid? Follow the money. I'd be backtracking it to find out who these finfluencers are being sponsored by and who's paying them to spruik the product or that information. I'd be tracking back to see, because they're not going to waste their time unless they're going to be paid for it, says the cynic sitting here. But I can tell you a fact, someone's being paid to promote it. That's how these people make their money. So you're right. In terms of younger people coming through, they're going to get their information from social media, and you're going to find people who, what's the word I'm looking for, are more about closing the deal, because that's when they get paid.
So Philippa, tell us, like, what makes men ahead of women when it comes to finances? Yes, we understand women take a lot of time off work when bringing up children, etc. But let's say, like for like, if you compared a male, say in their early 30s versus a female, let's say they're in their career, what influences the female to remain behind in many cases? Not all, but many cases.
They're just not being paid the same income. They're just not being paid the same income. And a lot of the caring professions that men don't do are the lower paid professions. It was only a few years ago that people in the caring professions, like childcare workers, actually got a living wage. And one of them said, good, now I can save up and buy myself a home. She said, I can actually go and do something about my own financial future. And so if you've got people in the gig economy, or you've got people who are working part-time or casual across 3 jobs because that's all that they can get, then fortunately now coming in on the 1st of July will be payday super. So these people actually have to be paid superannuation in the day that you pay them, instead of scratching around at the end of the quarter finding out how much you're short of their superannuation entitlements. So now employers are grumbling because they actually have to pay their entitlements at the same time they pay their wages. And I thought, well, you want these people to perform to make your income in your business, then you pay them what you owe them. That's it. So budget for it, guys. It's what it is. So when people go for a job, for argument's sake, 70,000 plus super is their job, that's what they're really being paid, is the plus super. All the employer does is take that plus super and simply dump it into their super fund for them. So they actually have to make provision in their company budgets as a super and wage expense up front. It's that simple. And it's high time, because a lot of people, when businesses go bust, they don't have superannuation entitlements or long service leave paid. And they go into liquidation, and sometimes they miss out altogether. So women miss out because they are part-time workers. I have seen instances where, even not so much in the government or public service, but out there in the commercial world, men are paid more. Men are higher risk takers than women anyway. And in my HR days, whenever I saw referee reports, for some of the guys, these reports would glow in the dark about how amazing they are, their superior skills, and all their superlative adjectives about their experiences and their capabilities. And when you read the female, she's totally overqualified because she's had to be all her life just to prove herself.
Mhm.
You're too experienced, you're overqualified. And so guys will turn up for a job. Oh, yeah, I can't do half of it, but I'm sure I'll learn on the job. I'll just wing it, particularly in the finance sector.
But do you see this changing ever?
It'll take 3 generations. Because here's the thing in psychology, your parents don't bring you up, your grandparents do. Because your parents parent the way they were parented. Think about that. There was a book written years ago by Eric Byrne, I think it was. Gosh, a long time ago, decades ago now. It said, what do you do after you say hello? And what he's really saying is that your family scripts and the way your grandparents operate, the nonnas in Italy and the taties in Arabic and the rest of them, all around the world, the grandmothers drive the family. And the way she does things, and her daughters and her granddaughters do the same thing, because that's the way things are done around here. So whatever your family scripts are about the way women are treated and what's expected of women are going to be simply translated out there into the workforce across society. So unless, we had huge upheaval in the 1970s when Gough Whitlam first got into power. He brought the soldiers home from Vietnam, effectively ending Australia's participation. He made education free, tertiary education free. He gave the single mother's pension, and in 1975, no-fault divorce. So women could get out of abusive marriages, 50,000 divorces a year for 5 years after that. Yeah, I'm not kidding you. First 5 years, 240,000 divorces. You had women being able to support themselves and their children, and not only that, they could educate themselves. Total uplift. And within 7 years, all the orphanages had closed. So there was a huge drive towards women being uplifted, earning more and being heard. And subsequently over the years, particularly in the last, when was Trump first elected? 2016? And that whole white misogyny. And when he won this time round, one of the young white American, forgotten what he called, bloggers, and they were talking about the abortion debates and terminations and what have you in the States. It was a big deal in the last presidential election. And they said, your body, my choice. So how did we go in 40 years from women getting up on their feet, being supported by the government, being independent, and then over this period of time, it's gone backwards. So for women now, they actually have legislation to protect them. And look at the scourge of domestic violence. A lot of the women I've dealt with coming out of marriages, and you probably have coming through and getting them re-established yourselves, the domestic violence is an absolute scourge. So what gives the men right to murder women? And we've had, every 10 days a woman's murdered in this country? It's appalling. And we criticise overseas countries that don't have a particularly good attitude or policy towards women, or we only have to look at our own society. So anything that I can do to help women stand up on their own 2 feet and get educated and take care of themselves, I'm for it.
So a lot of work still needs to be done. And as you said, it might take 3 generations. Really, it's a very, very long time. So to sum it up,
No, but I think it's tragic. I think it's really tragic to know that, even though we are living in this country, in Australia, in a progressive culture, we still face those issues. I mean, Mona and
Mm.
I, we were in school when we came to Australia. We've been here over 25 years now. We've come a long way, but I think change needs to come at an individual level. And often people are so ingrained in their, as you said, their grandmother's scripts. It's hard to move. And like, how young do you start? What level of challenges or trauma does it take to say, I'm going to be the one who's going to change the trajectory of future generations? And I think it needs to come
Mm.
from both men and women, and not everyone has the awareness to take that ownership.
That's true. And in my experience, the only way people change their lives, and I'm one of them, is a health crisis or a loss where you have no control over it. And so you know yourselves what it is to lose and then start recreating. So everything that you two have created for yourselves in this country, I doubt you could have done it back from the country you came from. And so and it's just the way it is. So taking advantage of where you are and growing and developing and standing on your own 2 feet is a sort of example that you two could be for young women in your generation aspiring to do what you've done, to achieve what you've achieved. Because here's the thing, at some point, one of you or both of you looked at each other in corporate and said, I can't do this anymore.
You read our mind.
Yeah, there has to be a trigger point where enough is enough. It's the way relationships break up, it's a career change,
Yeah.
it's a way of life. And when you make that decision, the relief that you feel for making that decision and saying, yep, now how? We'll figure it out.
So, Philippa, I must share, right? 7 years after 7 years at Macquarie, busting my guts on a project, I was offered a redundancy. And in that one moment, it just made me realize that I was just a cog in the wheel. I thought I was the wheel, but I was actually the cog in the wheel. And that just shifted my perspective entirely. And I wasn't ready to leave Macquarie because I thought I was going to retire from there. Like, I loved the organization. I mean, the culture was great, very driven. That's really gave me the thrill of achievement. But then I found another role within the bank. But my heart had completely changed from corporate life at that point. And Moin and I, we had come across who was going to be our business mentor at that point. This is end of 2014, early 2015. Started the new role, wasn't ready to quit, didn't take the redundancy. Like, Macquarie offered me 9 months salary to walk away, and I didn't want it because I said I'm going to leave on my own terms when I do. And 9 months into that new role, I was in a meeting with two of my managers, and the male boss went on for 15 minutes for what things I had done wrong,
Oh,
as
for goodness
opposed to
sake.
as opposed to what I had done right. And in that moment, I said, I can't take this anymore. There has to be a better way. But the seeds were sown much sooner, right? During the GFC, this 1 year in corporate, when I'd seen people being walked out of the building, that you have to take charge of your destiny. You couldn't really rely on an employer. And I think Mona had a similar heart change.
I guess when Sana was actually ready to leave corporate, like I think it was January, and Sana said
2016,
26
17.
Jan 2017, and Sana had made the decision.
Hang on, what was the date, girls? I bet you know that one too.
17th March 2017.
Is when we walked out of. Oh no, that the day we resigned.
The day we resigned was 17th Feb 2017. But yeah, Mona was.
But I was like, okay, I'm too scared, and it was a big decision, right? To quit corporate, um and then I had a conversation with my manager, who was always very busy to focus on a project that I was working on. And then she was pretty much telling me how I needed to really, hold her and other people accountable to get their stuff, like get involved. And I walked out of that
Sorry?
meeting.
You are expected to hold your manager accountable?
Yes, that's right, because she was too busy doing
Crikey.
it was, she was genuinely busy, but all the pressure came on me, or the blame
Right.
that, that I wasn't quite holding her accountable for what needed to happen. And then I walked out, and then because we worked in the same organization, we catch up in the kitchen, and perhaps we probably had tea in the kitchen, Sana and I. And I said, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to leave. Yeah, so that conversation changed my heart.
But it took a lot, right? To, as we talked about, being women, it took a lot of thinking to have the mental strength, to mental toughness to say we'll quit, and being in high paying jobs and no salary coming in. It was tough. And I've been reading this book, The Psychology of Money, recently, and the most recent chapter says, we think other people's journeys look entirely perfect, but even the most positive of journeys are made up of so many failures as
Tell
you
me
go
about it.
along.
Changes.
Yeah. So I guess
I just have one
yeah,
burning question for you.
sure.
Were you in your around about 26, 27, 28 when you made all these decisions?
Well, Mona and I decided when we were 30 to quit corporate.
The lead up was what, 12 months before?
Or
Yes.
2015, actually.
Yeah,
2015.
yeah, no, we were 29 when we made the
Correct.
decision. And then we were
That mm,
29, 30, around that age. But I think we knew property was our destiny when we were as young as 7 years old, when our mom back in Pakistan brought us the Home World magazine, which was an Australian magazine, and just looking at floor plans. So we knew very early. And I suppose when we came to Australia in our teens, we probably knew about that property would be our destiny, because it just showed us security to, when you don't come from a lot of, wealth or background or foundations. I think property gave us
Stability.
stability. Property gave was light at the end of the tunnel for us.
safety and security.
Yep.
It's what it comes circles back to.
Yeah.
But I can
Absolutely.
tell you at age 28 to 29 in psychology, everything goes in 7 years. 7 years of age, 14, 21, 21st birthdays, 28 to 29 to 30 is one of the most generative, creative times of change in your life. Get married, get divorced, start jobs, start family, take on a mortgage. In the 2 to 3 year period, coming through your 20s when you've worked out pretty much where you want to go, that period of end 20s to 30 is the turning point in your life where you finish and start something completely new as a whole new path. So I'm not surprised. That's why I asked you how old you were, because exactly that's why I said there was a time when you said, I can't do this anymore. And then once you said that, it was a given. It was only a matter of figuring out the how after that decision. So in terms of making it work, would have been the scary part of how you support yourselves and how do you get started in terms of learning the things that you had to learn.
And unlearn. And unlearn as well.
Yeah,
And
because
yeah,
corporate doesn't teach you, right? A lot of the things that you need in business.
like doing your BAS every quarter.
Oh, well, I was trained as a chartered accountant, but I've tried to outsource that now these days.
Mm.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is there's a lot of courage and you're a lot more fearless when you're young because you know you've got time on your side. What concerns me are people are making these same financial mistakes in their 40s and 50s that they have always made all their life. Circles me back to why do they keep doing this? What's the trigger at the back? And so when I see this happening again and again and again, that's when the psychologist hat goes on and say, okay, what's really going on? So when I say for people like yourselves, safety, security, financial safety and security, stability, property, for most people, represents that base, once people have a home and it's being paid off, then there's a sense of relief around that because finally I'm safe. And so when I'm now dealing with people who are going through divorce and separation in their 40s and 50s, they don't feel safe. But we've got a lifetime where we're not going to be working after the age of 75. And now we're finding people are retiring with mortgages. They've got to go back to work or stay at work. And apparently the mining industry has a lot of people in their 60s getting jobs there.
Yeah. Philip, I guess conscious of time,
Mm.
I'm curious though, what would be your top, say, 2 to 3 insights for our audience?
In terms of understanding how you deal with your money, the way you deal with it, and the why you deal with it the way you do is an insight, because change usually only comes with a crisis where you're forced to change. And that's a big decision that a lot of people make, like getting married and getting divorced. They're huge changes in your life. Or there's a health crisis. So often people are forced into situations that they really don't want to be in. So the next point would be, what's the resistance to that? Because a lot of people fear change and they won't change because they're scared of what happens to come out the other side. When you're younger, it's a lot easier to make changes and deal with them than when you're older. So in terms of setting yourselves up now, I would say, and here's the other thing about going into retirement, given that we're spending a lot of years in retirement, when we're working with people and you're looking at the longer term when they're buying properties for investment, how many times have I heard elderly people say, oh, yes, I've got 2 investment properties and they're my super? The what? They're my super.
Mm.
I said, do you mean you've actually got retirement income? Yes, that's my super.
Mm.
That brings me right back to the fact that they were never educated in the first place.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing about becoming more educated about how super can work for you, particularly as a single woman. That will be the man in your life who looks after you in retirement. His name's Max. And that was described to me as a retired theatre sister. That her superannuation, never married, never had children. And because she was working for the government in hospitals, the superannuation, when she retired, is what's taking care of her. So it wasn't until I started thinking of it like that, instead of just a financial product that I provide advice on, it took on a whole new meaning for me. So when women are going through separation, divorce, as long as they've got enough superannuation to be able to, then they can live on their own without having to race off into another relationship to take care of them. So that's another insight that I've learnt. First of all, that trauma can inform decisions on your way through. Secondly, in other words, familial patterns. Crisis in your life will change your behaviour whether you like it or not. It's called survival. And thirdly, look at your superannuation as the asset in your life that is going to take care of you. And the more you can get into superannuation now, the better. With regards to the work that you do, getting people into property, in terms of they see that as one asset class where they feel safest with. But when you're talking about boasting about 36 investment properties, I just think of what could go wrong. So for people that aren't going into it with your level of education, as you said, it's about approval and seeking approval and self-worth. I think what you're doing is quite amazing. And in that sense, helping people become established as they get older with the work that you do. But also the fact that superannuation runs alongside it. Because as you know, from being an accountant and the field that you're in finance, when they start selling off their properties into retirement, CGT is going to come knocking. So that's the other thing I talk to women about. In realising their assets to prepare for their retirement to take into account the CGT involved as part of their forward planning. So I hope that was helpful.
Philippa, I guess I don't want to sound gory, but as we know, life is short and we don't realize it,
Yeah.
and we are busy making other plans, but action is always in the present moment. And if you see any, well, everyone should be thinking about everything that you've discussed today in our podcast and making note on how we can change for the better. Thank you so much, Philippa. It's been a pleasure having you on Property Addicts Australia today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. Anything I can do to help educate your audience, and also I'll bring you into Wise Girls Money down the track, and you can come onto our sessions as well.
And Philippa, how can people reach you if they wanted to have a chat?
If they go onto Wise Girls Money Academy website, and there's a page there where they can leave inquiries, or they can look up. There's a Facebook page as well. LinkedIn is another way you can contact me personally. Contact me through LinkedIn, DM.
Thank you so much, Philippa. Thanks for today.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.